There are moments in life when it feels like everything is shutting down. A chapter ends, a door closes, a familiar rhythm stops playing, and in that silence, we start to question everything. But what if the end isn't what it looks like? What if the very thing you're calling the finish line is actually the starting gate? So often we label seasons too soon. We look at the breakup, the job loss, the unexpected detour, and we stamp it with the word over. But hidden beneath what looks like an ending is often an invitation to something new. Life has a way of pushing us out of comfort zones we would never leave on our own. Think about it. If the door never closed, you'd still be standing in the same hallway. If the chapter never ended, you'd never have picked up the pen to write the next one. Sometimes the only way to move forward is to be forced out of where we've settled. And I get it. It's hard to let go of what's familiar. It's hard to say goodbye when you don't have a clear hello waiting on the other side. But faith grows strongest in those in-between spaces. It's in the tension between what was and what will be that your purpose begins to unfold. You may feel like you're breaking, but what if you're actually becoming? What if this ending is not a punishment, but preparation? The story isn't done just because the chapter changed. And the best part? Beginnings rarely announce themselves with a parade. They often come disguised, quiet, uncomfortable, and uncertain. But when you look back, you'll see it was the doorway to everything new. So lift your head, wipe the tears, step into the unknown with courage. Because some endings aren't the end at all. They're the beginning of your next becoming. ChatGPT said, life has a way of shifting without asking for your permission. And it's usually in those moments of sudden change that we discover the weight and wonder of what an ending truly means. It doesn't arrive gently. It barges in unannounced, shutting doors you thought would always stay open, interrupting the rhythm you thought would keep playing forever. And when it happens, the human heart naturally resists. It clings to what's familiar, even when the familiar no longer fits. Endings are uncomfortable because they take away our sense of control, forcing us into a space we never planned to stand in. But the truth is, some endings are not meant to destroy you. They're designed to redirect you. That job that slipped away wasn't a sign that you were finished. It was a signal that there's something greater waiting beyond what your comfort zone could offer. That relationship that ended wasn't proof that you're unlovable. It was proof that you're being freed for something more aligned with who you're becoming. Every interruption is also an invitation, even when it doesn't feel like one. You see, growth rarely comes dressed in ease. It comes wrapped in discomfort, uncertainty, and the silence that follows when everything familiar falls away. The end of something familiar is often the beginning of something you can't yet comprehend. And that's why it hurts. It's hard to trust what you can't see. But endings are not evidence of abandonment. They're often evidence of preparation. The space that feels empty right now is the same space that will soon hold something new, something you couldn't have received if your hands were still clinging to what was. It's a divine strategy, a quiet shifting beneath the surface, where what looked like loss is actually positioning you for increase. You might not see it now because we don't always get to understand the story while we're living it. We often see the pattern only when we look back. Think about the times when something ended and you thought it was over, yet later, that very moment became the turning point of something extraordinary. That's what hidden beginnings look like. They're quiet, disguised as heartbreak, wrapped in uncertainty, often accompanied by tears and unanswered questions. And yet, they hold the blueprint of everything that's next. To walk through an ending is to be invited to trust again, not in what you can control, but in what's being constructed beyond your view. There's a power that unfolds in closure because closure clears the clutter of what no longer serves you. It might feel like the door slammed shut, but in reality, it was gently closing so you could stop standing in a hallway that wasn't meant to be your home. Familiarity can make us prisoners. And endings can set us free if we allow them to. Stepping away from what you know doesn't mean losing your identity. It means making room for your growth to catch up to your potential. It's not about erasing the past, but about recognizing that the past doesn't own the future. What you thought was the end of the story is just the end of a chapter. And a chapter's ending is never the end of the book. Purpose is often revealed in reverse. You rarely see it while you're living it. But one day, when you look back, you'll realize the moment you were most afraid of was the moment everything truly began to change. And that realization teaches you something powerful. The ending was never meant to break you. It was meant to build you. It was meant to stretch you, to shake loose everything that was holding you in place so your next season could have room to breathe. It's hard, yes. It's messy, yes. But growth has never been born in comfort. It's born in transition, in those sacred spaces between goodbye and hello, between what was and what will be. This is why endings must be embraced, not feared, because in their shadow, new beginnings are quietly waiting. They don't shout. They whisper. They don't rush in with fireworks. They arrive in small, steady steps. And if you keep your heart open, you'll see that what felt like loss was actually the making of something new. So when you find yourself standing at the edge of an ending, don't shrink back. Don't label it too soon. Don't call it over when it might be the doorway to everything you were made for. Let it stretch you. Let it shape you. Let it teach you to trust again. The end isn't the end. It's the beginning dressed in disguise. And if you can walk through it with faith instead of fear, you'll discover that the best stories often begin where you thought they ended. There are moments in life when everything we've come to depend on suddenly shifts. And in those moments, endings arrive like unexpected guests showing up without a warning or invitation. They have a way of stripping away the plans we carefully built and the comfort we quietly grew attached to, leaving us staring at the remains of what used to feel secure. It's a strange tension, standing in the space where what once felt stable no longer exists, and yet the new hasn't revealed itself. This is where many lose heart, because endings rarely look like the beginning of something beautiful. They often look like loss, silence, uncertainty, and unanswered questions. But what's hidden beneath that disruption is a greater truth. Some endings are not destruction, they are divine construction. They are quiet, unseen foundations being laid for something we may not yet have language for. When a door closes, it's not always rejection. Sometimes it's redirection. It is life's way of saying, you've grown as far as you can here. The space that once held your dreams may now be too small for the person you're becoming. And the end is simply the way the universe clears the path for the next chapter. And though it may hurt, though it may feel like everything is falling apart, it's often in these uncomfortable transitions that purpose begins to unfold. Growth is rarely wrapped in comfort. It comes in the form of interruptions, detours, disappointments, and unexpected changes that push us out of our familiar surroundings and into the unfamiliar spaces where our potential lives. Endings, as painful as they seem, are often the tools that shape us for what's next. They teach us resilience, patience, trust, and the ability to let go of what was so we can embrace what will be. There's a quiet power in realizing that the story isn't over just because the chapter ended. The ending you fear may actually be the very thing that saves you from staying stuck where you don't belong. It takes courage to not just mourn what was, but to make room for what's to come. The real work begins when you choose not to define your life by what you've lost, but by what you're being prepared to gain. Think of how many times you thought something was over, a job, a relationship, a dream, and yet looking back, it was that very ending that forced you to grow, to move, to become someone stronger, wiser, and more ready for what was waiting on the other side. Beginnings rarely announce themselves with clarity. They arrive softly, often wrapped in uncertainty, wearing the disguise of something falling apart. But in that in-between space, between goodbye and hello, you're being reshaped. Every closed door is creating space for a new one to open. Every chapter that ends is building the courage to turn the page. And though the process may not make sense now, there will come a day when you look back and see the perfect alignment of it all, the way endings prepared you for beginnings you couldn't imagine. So don't fear the closing of this season. Stand tall in the unknown. Trust the silence between what was and what will be. This is not where your story ends. This is where a new one begins. Not with fanfare or clarity, but with quiet strength and unwavering faith that even endings have a purpose greater than the pain they bring. It is in this quiet unfolding that your next chapter is being written, not as a continuation of the past, but as a new and extraordinary beginning. Endings have a way of arriving when we least expect them, often wrapped in silence rather than ceremony, in whispers rather than warnings. One day everything seems steady, familiar, and predictable, and the next it's as though the ground beneath us has shifted without permission. This is the nature of life's turning points. They rarely give notice, and they rarely ask if we're ready. What makes endings so hard is that they don't just take away what we know, they also confront us with what we don't yet understand. They create space where certainty used to live, and that space often feels unbearable because it's unknown, unshaped, and unsettling. People cling to what is familiar, even when it no longer fits them, because the familiar offers a false sense of security. But what if the shaking is not to break us, but to move us from places we've outgrown? What if the door closing isn't rejection, but protection, not punishment, but preparation? This is the hidden side of endings. Beneath the surface of what feels like loss, there is often a quiet beginning taking shape, something we can't yet see because it's still unfolding beneath the soil of our lives. It's like the seed that has to break apart before it ever sprouts. The breaking is not the end of the seed's purpose, but the beginning of its true becoming. In the moment, of course, it rarely feels like that. Endings come with a storm of emotions, confusion, anger, sadness, fear, sometimes even shame. We try to make sense of why something that felt permanent suddenly isn't. We replay conversations, reimagine scenarios, cling to what was, and ask questions we may never get answers to. But the absence of answers does not mean the absence of purpose. Life often requires us to walk through seasons that don't make sense at the time, only to reveal their meaning later. The hallway between endings and beginnings can feel endless because it is a space where our trust is stretched and our patience is tested. It's where we're forced to let go of what was familiar without yet having something new to hold on to. And yet this is the very space where transformation is born. It's not in the mountaintop moments that we grow the most. It's in the in-between, in the tension between goodbye and hello, between the known and the unseen. What looks like a setback may be a setup. What feels like breaking apart may actually be everything falling into place in a way we could never have planned. It's in the stillness, in the uncertainty, that the roots of our next chapter are forming beneath the surface, even when all we can see is the dirt. With time, a strange thing begins to happen. What once felt like the end starts to reveal its real identity. We begin to see how that closed door pushed us forward, how that lost opportunity freed us to discover something new, how that heartbreak made space for a deeper kind of wholeness. The ending that once felt unbearable becomes the turning point that shaped us. It doesn't mean the pain was imaginary or easy. It means it was purposeful. And purpose has a way of rewriting pain into power. This realization doesn't come all at once. It unfolds slowly, like a sunrise after a long night. The light doesn't erase the darkness that came before it, but it proves that darkness was never the end of the story. What once felt like a finish line begins to look more like a doorway. And when you finally step through that doorway, you realize it was never just an ending. It was a carefully disguised beginning, an invitation to become someone you might not have met otherwise. So instead of fearing the end, we learn to trust the transition. We learn to hold endings with open hands, to allow what is leaving to leave, and to let the silence between chapters speak to us instead of scare us. Because somewhere inside that silence, the next sentence of our story is already being written. One that will make sense of what didn't before. One that will turn pain into purpose. One that will prove the ending wasn't the end at all. There are seasons in life when everything changes without our permission, when what felt steady begins to shift beneath our feet, and we find ourselves standing in the ruins of something we thought would last. Endings arrive like that, without warning, without gentleness, and without asking if we're ready. They close doors we were still trying to walk through and turn pages we weren't finished reading. And in those moments, it's easy to believe that the story is over, that the final chapter has been written, that the last word has already been spoken. But that belief is a lie whispered in the fog of uncertainty. The truth is that many endings are not the final line of the story, but the beginning of a new sentence we haven't yet read. The discomfort you feel when something ends isn't proof that you've lost everything. It's proof that something unfamiliar is being born. Just because you can't see the new chapter doesn't mean it's not being written. Growth doesn't always announce itself with clarity. It often hides behind loss, behind silence, behind what looks like an ending, but is actually the groundwork of a beginning. The hardest part about endings is not the moment they happen, but the silence that follows. It's in that silence that doubts grow loud, questions multiply, and fear tries to convince you that this is all there is. We start to replay every decision, searching for where things went wrong, convincing ourselves that something must have been broken in us to end up here. But endings aren't always about something going wrong. Sometimes they happen because we've outgrown the place we were standing in. Sometimes they're the universe's way of clearing away what can no longer hold the weight of who we're becoming. Familiarity has a way of making us settle for less than what we're capable of. Endings disrupt that. They push us away from what's comfortable and force us to walk into spaces where we must trust what we cannot yet see. And it's in those unseen spaces that the roots of our future begin to grow. Though it feels like you've been stripped of everything, what's really happening is a quiet rebuilding, a rearranging of your path to lead you somewhere you never would have gone on your own. That's the strange beauty of endings. They feel like breaking, but they're often the moment something greater begins to take shape. In the middle of that transition, it's easy to misinterpret pain as punishment. The sting of loss can convince you that you're being abandoned or forgotten, but endings are often the opposite. They are invitations to trust, to stretch, to step out of who you were and lean toward who you're meant to become. The hallway between what's behind you and what's ahead of you is not meant to be rushed through. It's meant to shape you. The uncertainty you feel is not a sign that you failed. It's evidence that you're still in the process. Every seed has to break before it grows. Every tree has to shed before it blooms again. And every life has to walk through endings before it can step into beginnings. It's in this quiet, unseen work that the foundation of your future is being laid. You may not see the new chapter yet, but that doesn't mean it's not forming. The silence between the pages doesn't mean the author has stopped writing. It just means the story is turning in a way you can't yet comprehend. Eventually, when enough time has passed, the ending that once felt unbearable begins to make sense. The pain that felt endless becomes the soil where your strength took root. What once looked like loss becomes the very thing that pushed you into purpose. You begin to see how the closed door led you toward an open one. How what left made room for what needed to arrive. How the unfamiliar became the foundation of something better than you imagined. And in that realization, you discover a quiet power. You were never being destroyed. You were being redirected. The ending wasn't the final scene. It was the necessary transition between chapters. And though the journey through endings is never easy, it is always meaningful. It stretches you, refines you, and awakens the parts of you that would have stayed asleep if everything had remained the same. So when endings come, don't cling so tightly to what's leaving that you miss what's arriving. Stand in the silence, trust the unfolding, and believe that this chapter's close is not the end of the story. It's the disguised beginning of something extraordinary. Something that will one day make sense of every tear, every doubt, and every moment you thought it was over. Life has a way of turning the page before we're ready to let go of the last line. Endings rarely come gently. They arrive abruptly, sometimes with a whisper and sometimes with a crash. They close doors we thought would always stay open and unravel plans we thought were certain. In those moments, everything feels shaky, like standing on ground that no longer remembers how to hold us up. The weight of an ending can feel unbearable because it doesn't just remove something from our lives, it also removes the sense of stability we built around it. We don't only mourn what's gone, we mourn the version of ourselves that existed within that season. And yet, endings are not meant to be proof of failure. They are markers of transition, signposts along the road of becoming. They remind us that permanence is an illusion and that growth often begins with disruption. Just because something ended doesn't mean it was wasted. Many of the most important beginnings hide behind moments we once called the end. The silence that follows an ending can be the loudest sound you've ever heard. It's in that silence that questions echo, doubts multiply, and fears grow louder than faith. You start asking yourself what you could have done differently, whether you should have held on tighter, whether letting go means losing part of who you are. But the silence after an ending isn't a void. It's a space being prepared. It's the ground clearing itself so new roots can take hold. It's uncomfortable, yes, but discomfort isn't the enemy. It's the environment where transformation starts. We often crave clarity in these moments, hoping for immediate answers, but beginnings rarely show their faces right away. They hide in the quiet, growing slowly beneath the surface while we learn to trust again. It's in the in-between, between what is closed and what is opening, that our character is tested and shaped. It's where we learn to stop relying on certainty and start leaning into faith. The hardest part is not when the ending happens, but when we try to live through what comes after. This is the hallway between chapters, the space between goodbye and hello. Here, everything is uncertain, and that uncertainty can make us feel like we're standing still. But stillness is not the same as being stuck. Stillness is a kind of sacred pause, a moment when life gently removes what no longer belongs so there's room for something new to grow. Think of it like the seed buried in the soil. It looks lifeless from the surface, but beneath there's movement, growth, and preparation. The seed doesn't fight the darkness, it uses it. And the same is true for us. Endings may bury us for a while, but that burial is never the end of the story. It's the beginning of a deeper becoming, even when we can't see it yet. Our perspective often mistakes darkness for death, but it can also be the womb of new beginnings. With time, perspective starts to shift. What once felt unbearable begins to reveal its hidden purpose. The closed door that seemed unfair begins to look like protection. The season that ended begins to look like preparation. This is the quiet miracle of life. It uses what feels like loss to lead us into something greater. We begin to see that endings are not meant to diminish us, but to make space for what we would never have reached if we stayed where we were. Growth doesn't happen in the comfort of the familiar. It happens in the stretch, in the letting go, in the places where we're forced to trust without seeing. And when the new season finally begins to unfold, we realize that the ending we feared was actually the beginning we needed. What once felt like falling apart now looks like the moment everything started to come together. This understanding doesn't erase the pain, but it redeems it. It doesn't deny the hurt, but it gives the hurt a purpose. The story doesn't end with what ended. It continues with what is becoming. Endings are disguised beginnings, not because they're easy, but because they hold the quiet power to transform us. They strip away what we thought we needed so we can make room for what we truly need. They teach us to trust the process, even when the process makes no sense. And in time, they reveal what we couldn't see before, that every closed chapter holds the seed of a new one waiting to grow. So when the end comes, don't rush to label it as failure or finality. Stand in the silence. Let it teach you. Let it shape you. Let it prepare you for what's next. Because the ending isn't the end at all. It's the hidden beginning of something more than you imagined. It's the doorway you didn't know you needed, leading you to a chapter that's already waiting with open hands. There are moments in life when everything familiar seems to collapse at once, when the structures we've leaned on begin to shake and the plans we built with quiet certainty unravel in our hands. Endings come like storms that no forecast prepared us for. Sometimes they announce themselves slowly with cracks forming over time, and sometimes they arrive suddenly without a whisper of warning. Either way, they carry with them a weight that presses against the heart. It's not only the loss of a job, a relationship, a dream, or a season. It's the quiet shattering of what we believed would always be. The pain of an ending is deeper than what disappears from view. It's tied to the identity and stability we built around what has now closed. But endings, as harsh as they seem, do not always mean failure. They are often the quiet turning of a page we didn't know needed to be turned. What feels like collapse may simply be construction, a new beginning hidden beneath the dust of what just fell away. The silence that follows an ending can be the loudest sound you've ever experienced. When everything goes quiet, doubts begin to shout and questions seem to echo with no answers in sight. You start asking yourself if you could have done more, if you missed the signs, if maybe the ending means something is wrong with you. But endings are not always accusations. They can also be invitations. They invite you to release your grip on what's no longer meant for you, to trust that empty spaces are not voids, but vessels waiting to be filled with something new. It's human to want clarity in the middle of chaos, but clarity often comes later, not in the moment of loss. In the immediate aftermath of an ending, all we can often see is the void, the gap between what was and what isn't yet. It's in that gap that fear likes to settle, but it's also the very place where faith has room to grow. The silence is not a sign that the story has stopped. It's the pause between chapters where something new is gathering its strength. The hardest stretch of an ending is the space in between, the hallway where one door has closed and the next has not yet opened. This in-between season is often the most misunderstood because it feels unproductive, uncertain, and uncomfortable. It's a place where people want quick answers, but quick answers don't build deep roots. Growth in this space is quiet and hidden, like a seed beneath the soil. From the surface, it looks like nothing is happening, but below, transformation is taking place. The seed doesn't resist the darkness. It uses it to break open and expand. Likewise, endings have a way of planting us in seasons that feel like burial when in fact they are seasons of becoming. Pain makes us believe we've been buried, but purpose whispers that we've actually been planted. And it's in this quiet, unseen stretch that we are shaped into who we need to be for what comes next. With time, the edges of pain begin to soften, and what once felt unbearable starts to reveal its hidden meaning. The closed door that felt unfair begins to look like protection. The season that ended begins to look like preparation. It's a strange transformation that only time and perspective can offer. We begin to see how the ending forced us to move, how it shook us free from comfort zones we might have never left on our own, how it redirected us toward places we were meant to go all along. Endings are often the architects of change we never would have designed for ourselves. We fear them because they strip away what we know, but in doing so, they make space for something greater than we could have imagined. The pain doesn't disappear, but it begins to make sense in ways it never could in the moment it first arrived. What's extraordinary is that the beginning rarely announces itself with clarity. It creeps in softly, often wrapped in the same uncertainty that made the ending so painful. A new season doesn't always look like a celebration at first. Sometimes it looks like a quiet shift, a small opportunity, a subtle change of direction. And if we're too busy mourning the ending, we can miss the whisper of the beginning. That's why trust matters so deeply in these moments. We can't always see the new chapter forming, but it doesn't mean it isn't being written. Every ending plants a seed, and every seed takes time to grow. The key is not to rush through the in-between, not to despise the silence, but to understand that what's forming beneath the surface often holds more power than what has already passed. Eventually, we come to understand what we couldn't before. The ending that once felt like loss becomes the moment everything began to change for the better. It becomes the turning point, the unseen doorway, the unexpected gift wrapped in pain. And this understanding doesn't erase the hurt, but it redeems it. It gives the pain a purpose, a meaning that strengthens rather than weakens us. Endings are not the enemy. They are simply disguised beginnings, arriving not to destroy, but to rebuild. They teach us to trust the unfolding, to walk forward even when the path isn't clear, to believe that the silence between chapters is not wasted time, but sacred preparation. So when the next ending comes, and it surely will, remember this truth: what feels like the end is often the most important beginning of all. It may not come with fanfare or clarity, but it will come with purpose. And when the dust settles, you'll see it was always leading you somewhere you were meant to go.